Hey everyone, I'm Dom. I'm the founder and program manager of the RippleX Fellowship. Today we have Maddie Rifkin with us, founder of Mount. And would love to get a quick background on you.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm the founder of Mount. Basically, we're building a marketplace for nomadic travelers so that they can go just a backpack and rent and experience pretty much everything in destinations from the locals that know the environment and the market.
Awesome. Tell me about the founding story, because I know that you had an original business where you had like a hardware lock for bikes, and then you pivoted into this new business now that you're running. Tell me about that story from inception, what you were doing in the original business, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, it's funny at Mount, we like to say we've made probably at least 9 pivots at this point to get to product market fit. And basically, Mount started as a hardware product. It was called Mount Locks. And I had essentially developed a bike lock when I was 12 years old. I got a patent for it, and that's what started this all. And then I ended up at Northeastern University to study entrepreneurship, started Mount Locks. And that's really when I started diving into, okay, what does it mean to build a company? What does it mean to have product market fit? It's not just an idea. You actually need to be solving a problem. And that's what started my journey of pivots and got me to this point.
So what would you define the problem that you're solving today, and how has that evolved over time? What was the original problem with that lock business, and what is that problem statement now?
Yeah, so the problem statement now is twofold because we're a marketplace. We have 2 customers. From the supply side of our marketplace, it's actually from the local perspective, which actually in this instance we consider an Airbnb host, someone who has an accommodation you come stay at. Their problem is that they really can't offer their guests hotel-like amenities. It's really hard for them to answer the questions when it's like, what should I be doing? Where should I be going? Other than a word of mouth recommendation. And on the flip side, guests are coming and wanting all of this stuff. They want the golf clubs, they want the bike, the scooter, maybe the experience of a local foodie tour. It's just they want more out of their trip than just a place to stay. And so Mount is stepping in as the connector. Basically, we've brought in entire markets online with rentable gear experiences, and we tap both the supply and the demand into it, and connect and facilitate these great experiences. The problem is a little nuanced in that it's a two-sided problem. 2 people feel it, which is how you have a marketplace. Not an intentional pivot of ours, but ended up where we are.
And walk us through that pivot. So tell us the original story and how you even came across this new like problem space and how you decided that this was the right direction to go.
Yeah, so basically when Mount started, it was a lock company. And the reason I had developed and created that lock was because I thought it was hilarious that bike locks existed not attached to the frame of the bike. To me, that just made absolutely no sense. Like, why would you have to carry something else? When I always forgot it, the key got lost. Like, it was just a cumbersome problem. And I'm like, if it's in the frame of the bike, one, people probably can't cut it or get out of it because it is the frame. And then 2, you're not going to forget it. So that was the initial problem we were solving. And that's what I created with that lock. And then as I dug into that problem, started talking to customers, really learning the landscape of bike locks, it just became apparent that bike locks was a saturated market. There were 2 leaders, Kryptonite bike locks, actually 1 leader, I think it's them. And then bike locks are built to be destroyed. Like, people actually film videos just destroying them. Like, they take pleasure in that. And so it was a hard business to be in, especially building a hardware product. And so that kind of sparked our first pivot, is like, where can we go with this lock that there's an actual problem for it? And that actually was our first pivot into the scooter industry, when Bird and Lime were baby companies. Because if you guys remember, people were putting scooters on the streets. They had no locks and it was complete chaos. And I was like, oh, they actually might need a lock. And since ours attached to the frame of something, it was the perfect solution, because you couldn't use a normal bike lock on a scooter. You still can't. It really doesn't work. And so I had approached those companies with the lock idea. Turned out we were pretty right. They did need it. City governments actually started requiring it. So it either further validated what we were building, got to work putting together a supply chain, and then realized it was very expensive to build a hardware product. And I had no expertise doing that because I was still in college, wasn't even studying mechanical engineering, none of the sort. And so it was just a big mess. And then essentially COVID hit, and we had to really rethink what we were doing, because the scooter industry was hit really hard. The supply chain in general was just destroyed. And so every aspect of what we were doing really got heavily disrupted, to the point where we couldn't make any money from it. And I was like, all right, perfect timing, because I really didn't want to be in hardware anymore anyways. It was a nightmare. And that sparked our third pivot. And I think actually this is where the most important pivot happened, because at this point, we could have looked at ourselves, and honestly, it was honestly just me at the business right now. So I just looked at myself and been like, I think I'm going to quit. Like, the hardware product didn't work, I'm done. But instead I was like, let's see where else I can take this. There's other problems to solve. And one of the big learnings from doing this whole scooter bike lock thing was that everyone riding a scooter was a tourist. And they were not marketing the scooters that way. They marketed as a commuting tool. And I was like, there's this huge missed opportunity. Why can't we just put these scooters on private property, like an Airbnb property, get it directly in front of the guest and the tourist, and bypass pretty much all the issues scooter companies were having, and that's why they're not profitable. And so decided to just keep pivoting and pivoting, listening to customers, and that brought us to the Airbnb space. That's how I learned firsthand. I was actually going to the Airbnb properties, talking to hosts, setting up scooters, staying there, seeing how it worked. And that's really when I really discovered the true problem that Mount is still solving, which is hosts want to offer amazing things to guests, guests want amazing things, and there was nothing in that space. And so that's what Mount has really become. And then over the last year and a half, I wouldn't call them pivots. I would call it more refining product market fit and just going really deep in that space and getting really focused.
Yeah. And was it hard to let go of each of those iterations of the business? Because we've seen in the past where founders, early days, you are in love with that first iteration or that first vision, and it's hard to let go of it sometimes as you either validate or unvalidate those problem spaces and theses that you have. So was it hard for you to let go of those ideas that you had along the way, or was it very easy for you to make those pivots?
I think for me, it wasn't, because I knew the greater goal wasn't, okay, the vision I have now, because who the hell knows if it was right. It's more, I want to be successful and I want to build a company that's going to be meaningful. And what does that actually mean to the customers that we're helping? And I can't be right about that 100% of the time. That's why you have to talk to your customers constantly. And I think it's what makes or breaks a great founder is your ability to pivot and let go. Like, a lot of founders aren't willing to do that, and it will kill your business. I was on the other camp where I'm like, we're just going to keep pivoting until we get it right. And so wasn't afraid. And it's funny, people ask me that about the lock, especially since I got the patent so young and it was such an idea. And they're like, I'm surprised you let that go so easily. And I was like, I didn't really care. I was like, the lock was it's a great story. It's a great invention. But at the end of the day, it wasn't going to move the needle to make $1 billion company. So let's keep moving towards that goal.
Yeah. And how long did it take for you to make those decisions? Because sometimes when you're going through that realization process, you get maybe a few points of feedback or a few points of tidbits that you get from these customers, and maybe the market environment change that you talked about, COVID happened, these law companies, supply chain, like all these things were just changing. How long did it take you, and how much data did you want to see before you wanted to fully commit to pivoting?
It's a good question. The bigger pivots where it was bike locks to scooter locks, that one had to happen so fast because that market just created itself overnight, and the craze, people were chasing scooters down the streets because they wanted to ride them. They're like, what is this bird? So I was like, okay, that happened really fast. I basically jumped on a plane, flew to California, and the next day was at their office, knocking on their doors with the lock. So that one was pretty instant, partly because I feel if you try for even a few weeks and you're not getting any traction selling your product, you don't have product market fit. Like, you should feel that pretty instantly. And so whenever I didn't feel it, I wasn't going to force it. So I was like, okay, let's just keep finding different avenues to find this. And then when I brought the lock to them, we started feeling that. And then the course of events unfelt it. And I'm like, all right, let's go to the next one. And then honestly, we're still changing the business model even now, really refining what we want. And honestly, we talk to maybe 20 customers a day minimum, and prospective customers. And I think that's super helpful. Obviously, there's going to be some noise. Don't pivot because one customer told you some bad piece of feedback. But if you're getting constant feedback or that something isn't working, don't be afraid to try other things.
Exactly. And I've always loved that about you and about all the other founders that we've backed. It's that you focus so deeply on that customer and that problem space, and you're not like solution oriented and solution obsessed. That's how you make sure that you're getting the right data and the right feedback from your customers. Is if you are talking to 10, 20 customers a day, that's the only way where you can feel that pulse. So I guess leading into that, I'd love to hear from you. What are you looking for, and what is that feeling that you're chasing to hear from your customers to know that you've actually struck problem solution fit? At least, like, how did you know that the bike locks were a fit with those scooters? What was the feedback that you were hearing, even when you're validating that problem and solution that you're building now? What was that signal that you got from the customers to really know that it was the right thing that you wanted to build?
I think when you go into customer discovery calls, like how we go into them, we explain a little bit about what we do and the founding story. And then we just let the customer or prospective customer talk. So like most recently, we've done these interviews where, hey, here's what we have, or they already know about us. And they'll get on the call and they'll be like, yeah, I've been looking for this solution 2 years and hadn't found anything until I found you guys. And what you built is exactly what I need. And right now we're going towards a product-led growth strategy, basically because we figured out if we onboard one Airbnb host, they'll go onboard the entire market. And so that's, I think, also when you have product market fit is like when your customers or even prospective customers start talking about you to other people, that's, I think, when you really know, okay, I'm clearly solving a problem that they think is relevant, it's theirs, and they're talking about it to others. And I think that's been super rewarding, is just seeing that happening and customers recommending each other and pushing Mount forward.
How long did it take for the customers to trust you enough to recommend to other people?
It's funny, I think I built Mount in a weird way, but I think looking back, it totally worked. But I don't know if I would do it again this way. But basically what I used to do, and I still do, is I showed up to a ton of conferences, and I'm just a really great networker. So I would get out there. People were like, whoa, you look 18. I'm like, cool, I'll take that. And they're like so willing to help a young female founder that I just really leaned into that and was like, how can I get these people really supporting Mount? Even though a year ago we didn't have a product to sell, we knew what we wanted to do, but didn't have anything out there. And sponsored some events, threw some cool stuff, and really just got people on the bandwagon of let's support Mount. We want to see this work. And now that we're relaunching a product, it's crazy how much support you have. And we've had customers come through probably 4 or 5 pivots at this point, and they're still with us. And they are like very much still bought into the fact that this will work one day, and they wanted to be one of the early adopters. And that's been pretty cool to see too. And just that people are still with us, even when they joined us as a scooter company.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I guess tell me more about the first customer that you've closed in this iteration of Mount. How did you find them? Was it hard getting them across the finish line? Tell me about that story, closing the first customer.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I remember this one so vividly. It was after the lock days, because those were harder sales. You were literally talking to the execs at Bird and Lime, and that was impossible. But when we got into the Airbnb space, one of the reasons I pivoted there as opposed to like hotels or multifamily is because Airbnbs are owned by typically one person, and who they are, albeit it's a very dispersed market, but they're pretty friendly and willing to work with you is what I've learned. And so this was middle of COVID. I was actually just in my basement, my parents' basement, building Mount down there. And I was sending emails out to Airbnb hosts that I would just find on the web, and ones that looked pretty friendly. And I'm like, hey, I'm Maddie. I'm a college student, still was at that point. When you use that line, everyone's willing to help you. And I told them a little bit about what I wanted to do and wanted their feedback. And I got an instant reply from Ellie, who is the founder of Home Slice Stays in Arizona, has a big property management company out there. And she was like, yeah, whatever you need, so willing to help. She's fly out here, bring some scooters, like we'll drive them around my properties and see what happens. So I did. I took her up on that offer. And we spent like a week driving around Arizona, looking at her properties, putting scooters places, talking to her guests, talking to her other network in Arizona. And I think that was just so helpful. Finding that one person that said yes. And then also she connected me into the industry, which was fantastic. She knew like the main podcaster of the industry, who now him and I are very good friends. She knew some other amazing people in the industry. So like really finding that person who's your champion that will help you, I think is amazing. And it happened to be Ellie back in the day.
Wow. Yeah, sometimes the right place, right time with the right person who truly believes in that vision and wants to help. That is the best case scenario to have that as a first customer. What would you have done differently to find more customers like Ellie, or what have you done in the past couple of years to find more Ellies as champions of the product for you?
It's funny because I don't actually think it comes down to the customer at the end of the day. When you're in your early stages, yes, they're going to be very helpful. They're going to tell you what's wrong with the product. But I think actually what I would do differently is how we built the product. We spent way too much time trying to build a product from scratch, really guessing on a lot of features that we thought they would want. We really overcomplicated it to the point when we launched in January of this year, it was a total flop. It like didn't even work. And I think it's because we didn't talk to enough customers, and we could have built that probably in a day. We spent 8 or 9 months building it. And that was so frustrating to me, in that it wasted a lot of money. There were some good learnings, but it was just, why couldn't we be a bit more scrappier in the product aspect of it? And I think getting that mindset is really hard as a founder, because you're like, whatever I want to put out there, I want it to look good. I want it to work. And that probably means me building my own software. When in reality, it probably could have been an Excel sheet or a Word document. It could have been something. And we could have just seen if it worked or not. And after that January launch, that's the mindset we adopted. Is like, how fast can we build this? What is truly the lightest version? And how can we just get this in people's hands for them to give us true feedback? And we actually just stop making assumptions. We'll be in stand-ups and be like, oh, I think this about the product. And I'll be like, no, that's an assumption. Go talk to 5 customers and prove it wrong or right, and then come back to me.
Exactly. So yeah, you mentioned 5 as a number of customers to get validation. Is there a number that you found, oh, after you've heard this certain piece of feedback or this idea or this pushback from customers, how many times are you actually looking for that to happen before taking it as fact or a strong leading indicator to make a real business decision?
It's a good question. I do think 5 is a good sweet spot, because you could have one pretty vocal person and then turn out that's not actually your customer at all, and you just built something for them and you're like, great, no one else is going to use that. But if you validate it with 5, even 4, you'll have enough good feedback that you can probably trust your gut on that one, that it's accurate.
Yeah, I agree with that. The biggest fear that I have with founders in that like first MVP, first customer stage is over indexing and over anchoring for 1 or 2 customers. I think like anywhere between 5 and 10 is good, at least from like a consistency perspective, just to see a little bit more of a broad reach to the problems that they're facing and maybe narrowing down on one very narrow solution to push out. But yeah, I agree. Like 4 or 5, if you've heard it within a short period of time from the same type of customer, it's probably true. And it's about pivoting and making those quick decisions to be able to change and adapt to those. And I guess let's move into the biggest changes that you're excited about for Mount going forward, and any new kind of initiatives that you have working on that you're excited about.
This is hilarious timing, because we have a huge announcement coming October 22nd. I can't really tell you what it is, because that would defeat the whole purpose. But that is really truly what we've learned over the last 4 or 5 months, is driving this big announcement. And we've spent the last 4 or 5 months in beta, I guess you could call it, with a lot of Airbnb hosts, the initial product, getting traction, and then figuring out, okay, this is where we need to go next. And it was a really good aha moment that we'll be pushing for towards October 22nd.
Awesome. Cool.
Excited
awesome.
for that.
And we will end off with, what is advice you would give yourself as if you were to start this company from scratch? What would you change differently if you had one piece of big advice?
I think my biggest one at the moment is that you don't need to get VC funding right off the bat to have validation. I always looked at that as validation as, oh my God, I can actually be a founder now. And that's not the case. If I did it all over again, I would totally go validate what I want to build, the problem, the solution, get a lot of traction that way, figure out a way to bootstrap it, be scrappy. Because if you can teach yourself how to be scrappy and then you get money, like that is so much better than just getting $5 million and be like, I'm just going to spend this however I want. Oh, $12,000 on rent a month. That's fine.
Yeah.
We're not doing that at Mount, by the way, but I've seen other founders fall into that trap, and it pays to have a lot validated before you want to take money.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Akshay from the last interview also mentioned that, where he's I bootstrapped this business and I really had to think long and hard before I took on external capital, because the moment you do, how you build the business going forward, the expectations of what the outcome should be changes. And you don't want to be in a situation where you take on capital and you don't really have that like problem solution fit, and then you're just like racing against the clock to either get more traction, get to an outcome. So I really appreciate that kind of feedback and guidance, because we get that question a lot from fellows all the time. Hey, should I raise capital? What does it mean when I take on capital? And what are the expectations when I do that? So I really appreciate that, and having capital as more of an accelerator than a starter.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely look at it that way. And it's funny too that you say a lot of your fellows are asking that, because I do feel that is like taught at universities, is like in your entrepreneurship classes, it's you get money from VCs or you don't get to start a business. They didn't really present you with any other options.
Exactly. But nowadays there's a lot more bootstrap businesses, cash flow positive, like amazing companies that are just rejecting capital externally. And yeah, every company has its own way of building and getting to a very good outcome on its own. So that's amazing feedback and advice. But yeah, thank you so much, Maddie. It was really great having you back with us on the RippleX Fellowship. Really appreciate you sharing your stories with us and always being an amazing contributor to our community. But yeah, appreciate you having us again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom.